Do you remember the name? Thomas Roberts? Maybe not. But hopefully when I remind you that he was the 21-year-old aspiring Royal Marine stabbed to death by an illegal immigrant who was already a murderer and should never have been in the country, your memory may be sparked just a little. I don't blame you, by the way, if it's not, because the MSM has barely covered this barbaric case because it doesn't fit their narrative that those of us who want to stop illegal immigration at all costs might actually have a point. But this case left an indelible impression on me, and I had the great privilege of meeting Tommy's stepdad. That's how he, Peter Wallace, refers to him.
Reliving it all, it breaks our heart because it's taken away not just our life. Some people say that it's left a hole in your life. It's more like a chasm. It's more like the whole world is falling apart because Tommy's gone.
Now, Tommy was an engineer, engaged to a lovely young woman, and he had the whole world at his feet. He was killed by Loangeen Abdul Ramzi on March the 12th, 2022. A man who should never have been in this country. Abdul Ramzi lied after arriving illegally on a lorry, telling Border Force officers he was 14 when he was actually 19 at least. He also claimed to be fleeing the Taliban and was unfathomably put into a secondary school with young teenagers in Bournemouth. No age assessment was carried out, even though he was known to have links to Norway and Italy, which could have revealed his real age. When he was expelled for carrying a knife, something that was reported to the police multiple times, he was simply moved to another high school with more British teenagers. Abdul Ramzi, who is now in jail, was a cold-blooded murderer. Before he arrived illegally in the UK, he had shot 2 fellow migrants dead in Serbia. He had been flagged as susceptible to terrorism by the Home Office's own Prevent Anti-Terror Task Group in 2021. He even posted his murder weapons on social media. He wasn't hiding this. He assaulted multiple pupils. He assaulted his foster mother. They all complained to the police and the authorities. Still, nothing was done. And yesterday, in a development that quite simply disgusts me, Rachel Griffin, the senior coroner for Dorset, decided to spare the Home Office into undergoing a full inquest into the circumstances surrounding Tommy's death. That is what his family want more than anything. She claimed there was no systemic failure in the circumstances that allowed this Afghan terrorist into a British high school only to murder an innocent 21-year-old Brit on a fun night out in Bournemouth. It was only after the murder that Abdul Ramzi's fingerprints were shared with Interpol, revealing his connection to the Serbian double murder. Tommy's family is rightly disgusted by the fact there will be no proper scrutiny of Border Force and the Home Office. They had pinned their hopes on this inquest. That's hardly a surprise. Their lives have been ruined.
He'd been caught with a knife and she'd taken it away from him, but nothing was done. And because of that, our son died.
And that has had a devastating impact on your life, hasn't it, Peter? You'll never be able to get over it, I imagine.
Of course he won't. But we take the risk of this happening again and again and again. So I want you to hear from Peter, Tommy's stepdad, who raised him, about his view of what happened.
Year-old from Afghanistan, and he was put into a school and into a foster home.
It's unbelievable, even to us at the time, before we knew his outcome and his previous convictions. He was obviously more than 14. And it
I
was,
mean, this was an adult. This was a full-blown criminal.
yes, he was.
And a killer.
And a killer.
In
And
one of our schools, allowed to roam free around
unbelievable.
Bournemouth.
He was in one where he was thrown out of because he threatened and carried a knife, and he was put straight in to the other. The parents are up in arms because they weren't told, and I think they should have been told if that sort of violent character is in the school.
So how do you feel about the fact that in the UK, for some reason, our soft touch policies allowed this man into the country to murder your son?
Soft touch policies is right. We welcomed him in with open arms without even phoning any of those countries that he was refused entry and saying why.
So no checks.
No checks at all. The unbelievable thing is, my wife is Filipino, and she said she had more checks done on her when she came into the country with immigration. And I've had more checks done on me when I joined a gym. But he had no checks at all, absolutely none. And even though the various people were warned, his foster parent and the immigration side of it were warned that he's a dangerous character, he actually posted WhatsApp pictures of him beating someone up, and with that sort of behaviour, and it was known to the police, he should have been asked the question, or he shouldn't have even been allowed in the schools. He should have been in prison.
He should have been in prison. This is a national scandal. That interview should have been leading the mainstream media. They ignored it. The investigative journalist Stephen Edgington said there are staff in the Home Office who are, quote, disgusted at this stuff and want to quit. They are ashamed these criminals got through and their bosses don't seem to care at all. But yet the top bureaucrat in that department still got a £15,000 to £20,000 bonus payment after the murder, on top of his six-figure salary. And as Edgington pointed out, Sir Matthew Rycroft has been the most senior civil servant in the Home Office since March 2020. Last year, he got a £30,000 bonus. Recently, he wrote to staff, the last few weeks have shown the Home Office at its best. He is obsessed with DEI, spends time meeting officials about trans rights, and helped write race plans for his department. What makes me most furious is that when people like me talk about the risk of not stopping the boats, talk about how the invasion of our southern border is a national emergency, something I declared back in 2021, before the murder of Tommy, we're accused of being far right, even though this is the human cost of not doing so.
When you hear people criticise folk who say, look, we have to stop the boats because we have to stop this flow of illegal migrants into the country because so many of them, no one's saying 100%, but so many of them are criminals. And they say, no, you're being heartless, you're lacking compassion. What's your response to that?
I don't think compassion comes into it. It's common sense. And I ask anyone who pleads compassion, if it's your child, your son, your daughter, your mother, your father is in the same situation, you wouldn't think the same. Anything you want, we'll put you in schools or here, there and everywhere. We'll give you a life that you don't have to pay for because you're an asylum seeker. And that's wrong. 9 times out of 10, they'll find out the info after the event, not before the event. Otherwise, someone else is going to die.
So I beg of you today, on behalf of his family, do not forget the name Tommy Roberts. Tommy could be your son, your brother, your boyfriend, your best mate. We are often told not to look back in anger when these crimes are committed by illegals who hate us and shouldn't be here. Candlelight vigils, talk of peace. And we're assured by our politicians that justice must be allowed to take its course before there are proper investigations. But as this case proves, that is bullshit. The globalists and the elite class believe that our attention spans are too short to remember. If they get through the heat of the initial crime, they're banking us all moving on, and then they'll cover for themselves, just like this coroner has covered for the Home Office by refusing a full inquest into what happened. So remember, they're banking us on moving on. We mustn't. Now it's time for the Uncancelled interview. And it's a great pleasure today to have on the show the editor of the brilliant Conservative Woman, a strident commentator on the issues that really matter in the UK and around the world, and one of our biggest freedom fighters, Kathy Gyngell. And Kathy, it is so great to have you on Outspoken, but I'm very emotional actually about this decision. As you can probably tell, I felt very invested in the murder of Tommy Roberts. I feel like it was a case completely ignored by the mainstream media, and I can't believe this decision. Given everything I outlined, how can the coroner say that there's no case for the Home Office to answer, no systemic failures?
Dan, lovely to be on the show, but this is a horrendous decision by the coroner, and reflects everything that's wrong about the total lack of justice in this country anymore. I mean, justice has disappeared. We have a right to righteous anger, but we're not even being allowed that. I thought the father was so dignified and so temperate. I'm not sure in his position I could have managed to be that. But nothing is being forgiven to people who have that righteous anger. And by golly, that is what's needed. And it needs to come from far more people in positions of authority in our society. I am totally distressed by their silence about the repression of things that they find awkward, because they refuse to row back on diversity. They refuse to row back on their dreadful, extreme immigration policies that nobody voted for. They refuse to row back. So, as you say, their method of silencing is to ignore and deny and move on. Nothing to see there. The only place there's something to see there is if an asylum boat sinks, or there's a potential drowning.
Yes, and then it's the biggest tragedy. Then it's the biggest tragedy, but the death of a Brit is ignored.
The death of a Brit, and what was appalling in that story is so many people put at risk. Mm-hmm. And for so long, the foster parents, the children at school, this boy lied. I remember a lot of us making a huge amount of fuss when it became apparent that the asylum seeker young men were lying about their age and there was no check. This is an extraordinary story. And it took the dentist to actually report that his dental thing suggested, this is what I read about the case, that he could not possibly be 14.
Yes.
I mean, what are we coming to? I mean, I would not wish a murder on anybody. Obviously, I'm not. But what is the detachment or the lack of empathy from people like Yvette Cooper, from people like Keir Starmer, to the children, the parents? They come out with the sort of right words. Oh, our condolences go to, we feel for. Then they move on within minutes. Keir Starmer has a lectern. As Laura Perrin said to me in an email, the savagely, brutally stabbed and murdered Southport children, they didn't get a lectern. They're nearly forgotten already. We are being absolutely, I don't know whether gaslit's the term, or
I think it is. I think that is the term, because
brainwashed into accepting that this is normal and nobody's to blame.
Yeah, and we're always told, aren't we, Kathy, that eventually it will be okay. If you're not angry at the moment, it will be okay. We'll get it sorted. Once this guy's gone to jail, there'll be a proper inquiry. Then things will change. But look at what happens. They don't. These people cover for each other.
I mean, I think that there was a very interesting article by Professor Gary Sidley where he's uncovered this thing about an absolute strategy of the government after the Conservatives got in called controlled spontaneity. And this was meant to people to do all the sort of type of woke thing after any terrible murder or attack. And in this case, it became very apparent with the 2017 London Bridge stabbings and terrorist murder, is that you take all attention off the perps. We're all meant to tell each other we love each other. We're all meant to, give all our sympathy. We're all meant to do that. The one thing we are not allowed to do is actually say who did it, why, and when are they going to be brought to justice, and how are we going to stop this ever happening again. We're not allowed to be honest.
Totally. And I think it is just worth pointing out to everyone as well, this was a complete chance attack on Tommy. So he had no relationship with this guy. He hadn't done anything to provoke it, Kathy. He was literally on a night out in Bournemouth. And this monster, this Afghani terrorist, was out to kill. And unfortunately, Tommy was the unlucky one, but it could have been any of us. And that is what is so terrifying when we are importing these people.
Yes.
And doing nothing.
He's not the only one. I mean, there was the case, the Hartlepool case.
Mm-hmm.
That was pretty, well, it's appalling. It's unbelievable. To one of them, the asylum seeker killed the other one in the hospital because he'd converted to Christianity. I mean, everybody's forgotten about that one too. It was only a year or so ago, I think. It is this awful moving on. And without the newspapers, as you say, making this absolutely the front page story and holding that. In the past, if we had a terrible murder, that story would hold on the front pages for several days.
Well, absolutely. And there is two-tier justice. And actually, I want to show you a video that Jim Davidson has made about another appalling example of this. Now, it didn't lead to a murder, but Kathy, I'm still so shocked that a man called Mohammed Hassan was at a petrol station, clearly a devout Muslim man. He saw 3 Asian women dressed in Western clothing and literally physically assaulted them. And not only has this not...
I'll let you decide. Mohammed Hassan.
London boy.
Beautiful British name.
Mm.
He
shouldn't make any difference.
It shouldn't. Well, this is the thing, isn't it? And this is the thing. So 3 women, Asian women, who were wearing makeup and not wearing traditional dress. He called them prostitutes. He punched and pushed 2 of them, and smacked one of the other woman's head against a car. Now, if you got jailed for 2 years for a social media post, how long do you think his sentence was?
Well, I think that is aggravated assault. It is grievous bodily harm, actual bodily harm, wounding with intent. Mm-hmm. Community service for him because he's Asian?
Community service.
No, you're joking.
Genuinely.
Two Tier Keir. You should be ashamed of yourself, Prime Minister. Get this sorted. That's why people are starting to hate you. People are starting to hate you.
Yesterday.
And you saw, Kathy, the genuine shock on Jim's face.
Well, exactly. I mean, I think there's another thing, that the sort of crazy thing about this, in this type of appeasement policy of justice, or that's both appeasement in terms of the sentencing and appeasement in terms of our response to it, the response we're sort of allowed. You know, you're racist, you're far right. If you draw attention to it. Is that actually, if you want, this country is not racist. This country is extraordinarily tolerant, and has been extraordinarily tolerant about very large numbers of immigrants. And tolerance is correct and right. But on the other hand, if you deny certain realities, and if you look as though you're having a 2-tier justice system which protects one group, you are going to invite racism. I mean, you literally are. And is that what they want to do? Then they can come back and say you're racist again. It's hard to know what the motivation really is in this illogic and um, prejudice. I mean,
Yeah.
the prejudice of our authorities and the bias of our authorities.
The great thing about being independent now is I only tell you about products that I use and truly believe in and think can improve your life like they have mine. So let me talk to you about Verso. As you probably know by now, I've entered my 40s thinking about staying healthy. And one of the ways I did that actually was looking for ways that I could be fit and sharp, but also, I guess, find out how scientific evidence can help reverse the aging process with interventions. And so scientists like David Sinclair have done that. So I was looking for a product that I knew would enhance everything I was already doing, also backed up by solid evidence. This product is called Cell Being by Verso. It has scientifically proven ingredients that fight the effects of aging by increasing NAD+ levels. I hadn't heard of them, but it's so important because it is the stuff that powers every single cell in your body. Wow, it's made a difference to me. I've been using this product every morning for months now. It's been genuinely transformative. My fasting is easier. I've lost fat. I've lost weight. The team at Verso tell me it's due to its blood sugar regulating effects, which lead to fewer cravings. I'm sleeping better. I wake up with more energy. I even feel happier too. So this has taken years off my life. I'd love you to experience the same thing. Verso publishes third-party testing from each batch produced to guarantee that you're getting what you pay for. And I'm very excited to say that to mark our launch, Verso is giving you an amazing offer. So if you head right now to buy.ver.so/outspoken, you will save 15% on your first order. All you need to do is use the coupon code OUTSPOKEN. The link is in our show notes on YouTube and Rumble. But to repeat, bui.ver.so/outspoken, use the coupon code OUTSPOKEN. Indeed, I mean, the thing that I find so depressing as well, Kathy, is that there are so few people within this country who are talking about this and arguing that point. I mean, I read your brilliant newsletter this week at Conservative Woman where you summed it up brilliantly. But a lot of the time we are having to rely on foreign actors to actually point out the madness, like Peter Sweden, for example, on X, who posted, Britain will begin to release sex offenders early to make more prison cells available. Meanwhile, they are sending people who post offensive words online to long prison sentences, Soviet Britain. And Elon Musk simply replied, wow. And it is a wow moment, Kathy, because I do believe now there are political prisons, because how else can you explain pensioners, housewives literally being locked up for posts that may have been an artful, Kathy, but were sent in anger and were soon regretted and didn't directly cause any violence, and now being locked up while sex offenders and violent criminals are being released?
No, it's extraordinary. I remember tweeting that day, 2,000 prisoners released on one day to make way for the however many it is now, 500 or 600 people done for social media offences. I'm trying to work out actually what law they were actually arrested under. I think it must have been the Communications Act of, I can't actually work out quite what law it is. They've been... Was it incitement to violence?
Yes, it's incitement to racial hatred. That's how they get around it. But some of these people, Kathy, had just posted political memes about wanting to stop the boats.
I know, and apologised and deleted very quickly. Yeah. No, I knew something smelt really wrong the first time he set up that violent disorder unit, and the first arrests began and the first cases did, and I remember tweeting saying this is like putting people in the stocks, but I didn't realise, and it was worse than putting people in the stocks. It's putting people in the stocks for 2.5 years or 3 years, and I thought he was just I smelt the public shaming felt very wrong to me. I thought this is something that Britain as a civilized country sort of got over when we stopped putting people in the stocks. And now Starmer was doing it again, but then he sort of doubled down, and it's got even worse. So it's like it's Lubyanka, isn't it? It's, we always used to be horrified by the Soviet system, and people would come in the middle of the night and take them off to Lubyanka. Well, the only bit we miss out, it took 3 days between an arrest, a sentence, and being in prison. I mean, arrest, court case, sentence, prison. So, what's the difference? It's more subtle. And of course, this is where the stupid woke middle classes say, oh, well, it's not, it's a judge and it's this right. It went through the court. It has to be all right. No, this is a perversion of justice.
Well, indeed.
And I'm horrified that people like David Davis, Lord Sumption, haven't come out and seen this what it is. It's an attack on the rule of law in this country. And our democracy is based on a rule of law. Where are they? Where are these senior people? I can't believe the remnant Tory MPs. Has any one Tory MP condemned Starmer for this?
Nope.
I mean, I think Nigel Farage is the only one who's put his head above the parapet on this. Yes. And then, of course, they accuse him of doing the riots. I mean, you can't make it up.
No, indeed. And I want to come to Reform UK in just a moment, actually. But something that has really started to concern me, Kathy, is the pressure that these folk are being put under to plead guilty. They're being remanded in custody, which is absolutely insane, given that is something usually reserved for criminals who pose a clear threat to the public in terms of violence. And so thank goodness, actually, for the new leader of UKIP. He's called Nick Marshall Tanchoni. He's actually going to be on Outspoken next week. And he has been in court today. And it's really, really interesting, actually. He managed to convince one person not to plead guilty, even though they were told that they would be remanded in custody if they did. So watch him explain what's happened. It's really fascinating.
The individual was contacted last night, which is standard operating procedure for a barrister if things aren't going to go the way they want it to go, and said, you're going to be remanded. If it's a not guilty plea, you're going to be remanded. And then we have what happened this morning with the brief as well. You're going to be remanded. This constant, you are going to prison. Now, the defendant has said, I'm not guilty. I'm standing up for what's right. I'm standing against two-tier judiciary. We've gone into court. 6 out of the 7 who have pleaded guilty have been they're being remanded. They're not being sentenced at a later date. They're going straight to prison today. They're on their way to prison right now. The one individual that said, I am not guilty and I'm standing up for myself, he was told he was going to be remanded. He's going to prison. He's been given bail. He's been given bail. And why has he been given bail? I've just been in the courtroom and I've heard the judge. Due to the enormity of cases, due to the pressure, due to the media sensationalism, they are throwing people in prison. The moment you say guilty, you are going to prison. But if you want the CCTV evidence, if you want that assessed, if you want people to know your story, if you want to say no to two-tier judiciary, if you want to stand up to two-tier policing, you have the opportunity to say, I'm not guilty, I'm not going to take your offer, which says, if I plead guilty now, I'll get less time. 6 out of the 7 now are on their way to prison. And this one individual has said, I'm going to stand up to you, no matter what the consequence is, I'm innocent.
Isn't it fascinating, Kathy? And that one individual, by the way, he apparently had been at the migrant centre, but absolutely insists that CCTV will prove that he simply walked in, walked out, wasn't involved in any violent activity, and hopefully he will now be able to clear his name.
Well, what an impressive guy. I mean, thank you, Dan, for, alerting me to him. I mean, that particular video needs to be shared all over, doesn't it? What it also tells me, this was a terrible attack on the white working class. That's what I felt, that, we had plumbers, we had a Sellafield worker, we had a carer, there's a pensioner. These are poor people. These are not rich people. They're not privileged people. And there was something extraordinarily bullying about the way in which they were treated. Were they given a chance? No legal aid for them. Were they given a chance to have a lawyer who said, hang on a minute, rather like the head of the UKIP party is now saying, hang on a minute, no chance to explain themselves. In court, they were humiliated, they cried, they apologized. That was already terrible public shaming. Sort of, wasn't it enough? No, he's so right. They must not plead guilty if they did not do anything that was actually violent or inside. I mean, there was one guy, and he's been sent down, and he simply had a baton in his hand, a stick in his hand. Okay, he was at a protest, and when they asked him to disperse, he said no, because he's saying this is my right to protest. I mean,
Yeah. People going down for yelling at the police. I mean, yeah, it's extraordinary. And of course, what's so interesting is that there's now a growing school of thought, Kathy, led by, speaking of people who've done brilliant work over this period, Toby Young of the Free Speech Union, that actually Starmer may have broken his own law in the way that he incited violence. Now, actually, Toby explains this much better than me. So let's listen to what he had to say, and I'll get you to react off the bat, Kathy.
There was some data about the initial wave of arrests showing that most people arrested were in fact locals, and only a minority from outside the areas where the disorder was happening. So Keir Starmer effectively, whether knowingly or not, has trafficked in misinformation about who is involved in the rioting and who is organising, instigating the rioting. And by saying it's people from outside your area, far-right, anti-Muslim activists from outside your area that are coming in to attack mosques and attack Muslims, that effectively triggered local Muslim populations in those areas to organise counter-protests. And during those counter-protests, crimes were committed. You know, people identified as far-right protesters were hunted down and attacked. The police, in some cases, were attacked. So you could argue that Keir Starmer himself is guilty of a criminal offence under the Online Safety Act, the criminal offence that he's urging the authorities to prosecute people for. He knowingly trafficked in false information, which definitely caused physical harm.
He's got a point, doesn't he?
It is very amusing, isn't it? I mean, in a way, it sort of reminds me of, you know, if you look back to your French history and the French revolutionary tribunals, in the end, they all turned on each other using the laws they had introduced under the French Revolution. I mean, yet we haven't yet to see that, Labour people turning on Starmer or killing each other, not killing each other, but attacking each other in that way. But of course, he's absolutely right. Any type of misinformation accusation it can so easily be based on misinformation itself that it just sort of goes around in a complete circle, and it's a complete waste of time. I mean, the Crown prosecution, the idea that anyone can be sort of found out for this in a way.
Indeed. It's very disturbing.
But whether he'll be held up for that, I mean, it would be very nice. Won't. But you can't. Who would be the lawyer? Who'd be the head of the Crown Prosecution Service isn't going to go for him, is he?
No, but there's loads of people like it, Kathy, just like Nick Lowles, who runs the ironically titled charity Hope Not Hate, which is actually one of the most hateful organisations in the country. Yeah. His disinformation, I mean, I actually hate that word, but I'll just say his lie, right? His point blank lie, which was that Muslim women were being acid attacked, did actually lead to violence. He hasn't even been arrested.
No.
And I don't think he should be, but if people on the other side are.
But he has a special relationship with the police, doesn't he? I mean, if
and
you
the
look
Labour
at what
Party.
they do, and he shows off about it, it's a vigilante group. They are vigilantes. You know, you could say it's sort of like a Ku Klux Klan, and ironically, I'll probably be done for defamation, but it actually sets out to hunt people down, hope not hate, to track people, and to then expose them to police and dob them into the police. And in I think on the website that I looked at recently, he shows off about their success in doing this. Now, what justice are those people going to get? Let's hope they don't plead guilty. There's something very wrong about the relationship of that. It should never be a charity because it's a politically activist group, and it's very left in its origins and in its support. It's absolutely appalling that it has charitable status.
It really is. It really is. But of course, that's not going to change under the Labour government, because they have literally been invited into Westminster in recent weeks. Thank you so much for watching Dan Wootton Outspoken. Please do subscribe if you want lots more clips and interviews like that. Plus, if you want to watch our totally uncensored after show, then visit www.outspoken.live.